He left no time to regret. Kept his bed wet with his same old safe bet. And me and my head high and my tears dry. Get on without my guy. You went back to what you knew, so far removed from all that we went through. And I, to red trouble track, my odds are stacked. I go back to life. We only said goodbye with words. I died 100 times. You go back to her and I go back to us. I love you much. It's not enough. You love her and I love back. And life is like a pipe. I'm a tiny penny rolling up the walls inside. We always say goodbye with words. I died 100 times. You go back to her and I go back. We only said goodbye with words. I died 100 times. You go back to her and I go back to learn.
Alrighty, guys, that was Cover by Sky. I know I did her last time. So you guys are probably saying, hey, Phoebes, where you been? You missed 2 weeks, right? Yeah. Hiya, Daria. Well, here's what happened. So I had it in my head what I wanted to do for a show, and I got like frazzled 2 Sundays ago. And I couldn't find what I wanted, right? So, because this laptop actually, the hard drive fried, everything got reset. So the things I know I bookmarked weren't on this. So then I went to do last Sunday's show. And guess what? Gotta tell you about this. Bam! A thing from flippin' YouTube. And what'd they say? Well, hi, Boom. They said, well, we're issuing you a strike. And I'm scratching my head. I'm like, but I didn't do a show last week. Because, you figure if you do something bad, they're going to correct you right away. Because we're like little children on here, right, guys? So, I go in, I open the email. And lo and behold, don't you know, I get a strike for a video that they gave me a warning for, and they took down 1 month and 4 days prior. So, of course, my appeal said, Well, how can you give me a strike on a video that doesn't exist? You gave me a warning for it on April or February 2nd, and you removed the video. This video no longer exists. Well, I lost that appeal. So I was in the bad girls corner for a week. And I want to say thank you, Foo Fam, for coming over with the Love Mob. Appreciate you here. I'm a little bit more reckless on my channel, although I said the Clinton Foundation on Marfs. There's like 3,000 words we're not supposed to say. I'm thinking to myself, do I even have a 3,000 word vocabulary, right? I keep it simple. Yeah, well, Daria, here's the thing. So, I was thinking the other week, and, they were saying about the student loan bailout. And I'm thinking, well, duh. The banks aren't going to say, you worked really hard for that college degree. We're just going to forgive that loan. No. The very next package that these guys are going to dish out is called something like the Build Back Better package or something like that. Okay, it's going to cost between $2 and $3 trillion. That's our money. That's our tax money. Who do they get the loans from? Well, people like Citizens Bank, they give student loans. So it's not like they're forgiving a federal debt. They are forgiving these, whatever the amount, whether it's going to be 10,000. Now, I did see that there's something in there. Hi, at home with Jen. There's something in this packet that they just passed. Something about 10,000 for student loan forgiveness. But anyway, I found some articles. I threw something in here because the thing I wanted, it wasn't here. All the stuff that I wanted is buried. So I must be really close, right, guys? And y'all know, hey, guys, y'all know that literally I did a show and I told you guys, hi, Ed. I was like, guys, I think COVID kind of happened because I thought the banks may have had some real bad issues, like maybe they failed. And then, bam, all of a sudden this came. So I did find some articles back from September 2019. So it's okay. I have a theory. I can't say it's absolutely, but I can read you guys some articles. So let's get started. Okay, what's the first one? The first one on the hit list is no, I forget what the heck I put first in the list. All right. Okay, let's go with okay, I'm going to take you guys back to the 2019. They're going to be mixed up in the description, right? But let me see. Here's this article. They're just going to be a little mixed up, right? So let me get a full screen on this. Uh-oh, full screen. All right, there you go. So, okay, now which one is it? Oh, my aching bacon. Okay, it's this one. So, this doesn't necessarily, yeah, it does. This was October 28th, 2019, and it says another look at the Federal Reserve panic in September 2019 and solutions for the crisis. See, I remember this because I was up at the farmers market and I was talking to Ward, and I was like, Ward, banks are in trouble. Ward. So, like, he'd be like, hey, what's shaking, bacon? And I'd be like, yeah, don't look good at the banks. So my friend and me, we were buying silver, right? We were like, uh-oh, this can't be good. So, but I was able to find this article, and it wasn't what I wanted, but it'll do. So as you may recall that from September from 17 September 2019, the United States Federal Reserve injected massive amounts of liquidity into banks due to a quite abnormal situation on the repo market. The repo market designates a mechanism used by banks to obtain short-term financing. They sell securities that hold in repurchase agreements, repos. For example, they place U.S. Treasury bonds or AAA company securities in repo overnight to serve as warranty or collateral for the loan that they are making. And they obtain cash at a rate of interest close or equal to the policy interest rate fixed by the Fed, which is close to 2%. Okay, so they have a video, but I'm afraid I'll get nailed for that one, right? Yeah, it's a CNBC. Okay, so it says, who provides the cash for the short-term lending? The lenders are their counterparts on the interbank market or other financial institutions such as the money market funds. From 16 September, there's been a crisis situation. Banks financing themselves on the repo market found themselves facing abnormally high interest rates. The interbank market had almost dried up, a situation called credit crunch. In other words, banks were not ready to lend one another cash even overnight. They couldn't. They were broke. They had no way to say, because that's what they do. Like Citizens might call up, JP Morgan and go, hey, well, can you float me $1 billion? And as soon as I balance out, I'll give it right back to you. So that stuff went on all the time. But everybody got caught short on this. So this was a really good article I found. And I did this stuff on a show, but I wasn't that good at doing the description stuff. So anyway, other lenders such as money market funds I went through that. So the big banks knocked at the Fed's door, asking it to substitute as a lender at rates they would consider normal. That is about 2%. The Fed hesitated for a moment before massively intervening in a highly uncertain climate bordering on panic by injecting over $50 billion of liquidity on the 17th of September 2019. Thus, the Fed acted as a substitute for the markets. It is striking to note how among finance commentators of both private and public media, none have pointed out that the markets, which are supposed to be self-regulating, do not actually function as they should. Indeed, the mainstream media, with their strong links to the world of banking and large investment funds, have remained silent about the fact that once again, the public authorities are forced to come to the rescue of big banks and help the market to keep going. After having injected on September 17, $53 billion into banks substituting for the interbank market and other private lenders, the Fed has made fresh injections of liquidity every day, bringing the amount from the second day on to a daily maximum of $75 billion, then up again to a maximum of $100 billion. On the date of writing, the Fed continues its daily interventions and has announced that it will continue to do so until the 4th of November at the earliest. And then it says, see televised interview by Bloomberg agency, and we're not going there either. In short, the crisis is still with us. The markets concerned have not returned to normal. The explanations put forward to justify the Fed's interventions as one-offs, such as a tax bill to be paid by banks at this time of the year or fluctuating price of petroleum due to the closure of 2 Saudi refineries, cannot explain a situation that has lasted for more than 3 weeks. Further on, we will see that the other explanation produced, namely that the liquidity regulations are far too restrictive, if no more convincing, but directly serves the interests of the big private banks. A paradoxical situation. As I've repeatedly explained, banks are not short of liquidity. In fact, the Fed has been injecting massive amounts of liquidity into the US banking system since 2008. We all remember 2008, right, guys? The problem then is not a structural lack of liquidity, but the use banks make of the liquidity available to them. To put it simply, they use the liquidity placed at their disposal to buy up massive amounts of debt. They buy public bonds guaranteed by states, and especially in the case of US banks, US Treasury bonds. They also buy massive amounts of bonds issued by major private companies, banks, industrial companies, the information technology and commercial sectors, the extractive sector, mining, oil, and so on. There are two main categories of bonds: low risk securities issued by a AAA corporation like Apple on the one hand, which have a relatively low yield, and on the other, junk bonds. So basically, our tax money is going to put money in these guys' pocket to go play on the money market, right? So, well, if it crashes, no big deal. So, anyway, these bonds are issued by companies with a bad reputation. This is a low credit rating, BBB, CCC, and worse. Junk bonds give high yields but are high risk. Banks also buy structured products which may be highly toxic. The bank's behavior in a response to the capitalist logic of making maximum profits in minimum time. Consequently, their managers try to keep as little cash as possible in their coffers, as this is money that is sitting idle in the bank, just an image, and not yielding any profit. When this happens, banks will buy as many bonds as possible. That is what they see as the best short-term investment. They buy safe bonds, mainly US Treasury bonds, that they can use as collateral to conduct a repo or similar operation in order to get cash to buy junk bonds on other financial products, structured products, derivatives, swaps, and so on, which may produce a high yield. While the Fed maintains a high level of injection of liquidity on the bank market by buying from banks the bonds that they bought from the US Treasury or private companies, banks use the liquidity to buy securities of various kinds, or in some cases, shares. In short, the money goes round and round and is truly in a truly vicious cycle. This produces one speculative bubble on the bond market, another on the stock market, and a third on the property market. Banks are not investing in the real economy. They lend very little to small and medium-sized companies for investment and production. This action on the part of private banks, supported and actively encouraged by the policies of the Fed. The same happens in Europe with the policies of the ECB and the Bank of England. In Japan with the policies of the Bank of Japan. In China with the policies of the China Central Bank. Leads to what was first named by the economist J.M. Keynes, the liquidity trap. See my article. Okay. Does the Fed not see the signals sent by the markets? Some claim that the Fed does not see the signals coming from the markets. First of all, I consider it dangerous to adopt such a magical sounding concept, ones which seem to support the myth that blind market forces make for a successful economy. Let's see, this is okay, the religion of markets. Almost all political leaders, whether of the traditional left or right, from north or south, worship the markets, especially the financial markets. Or perhaps one should say they have fabricated a religion of markets. Every day in every home with a television set or an internet connection, a service is held to honor the market gods. When the stock exchange listings and finance market expectations are reported, the market god sends signals through the voice of the economic journalist or finance reporter. This is not only true for industrialized countries, but for the most places on earth. Whether you are in Shanghai or Dakar, Rio de Janeiro or Johannesburg, Brussels or Athens, you will receive the signals sent from the markets. To emphasize the power of the market gods in the mind of believers, commentators occasionally announce that signals have been sent to governments to indicate their satisfaction or displeasure. This places where these gods are most likely to manifest their moods and to greatest effect are Wall Street in New York, the city in London, and the stock exchange of Paris, Frankfurt, or Tokyo. To measure their satisfaction, instruments have been invented called the Dow Jones in New York, the Nikkei in Tokyo, the CAC 40 in France. To assuage the gods, governments sacrifice their social security systems on the altar of the stock exchange. And they privatize too. They also take care to ensure that the distribution of added value should always favor capital to the detriment of labor. Why give simple operations such religious trappings? They are neither unknown entities nor pure spirits. They have names and addresses. They are the main leaders of the 200 big transnational corporations which dominate the world economy with the help of the G7, the compliance of the G20, and institutions like the IMF, which have which has come to the fore again as a result of the crisis. Institutional investors such as big banks, pension funds, insurance companies, and hedge funds, which dominate the markets, have received thousands of billions of dollars from governments in the form of donations or loans. That money was served to get them back on their feet after the meltdown of 2007, 2008. Guys, anyone remembering GameStop, right? Remember how a certain president was trying to tell us it's not all real? Well, it's not. That money market is our tax dollars. The stock exchange, when that goes up, I don't even know if these people are paying back. Let's see if this article will tell us, are they paying back? So it says we have to fight the fundamentalism and the radicalism of the financial markets. They must be disarmed. We have to break away from the capitalist system upon which the market religion has been fabricated. The reality, I believe, is more complex. The Fed is perfectly aware that the banks are in a bad way, and it is not entirely true that it does not see the signs sent from the markets. On the contrary, what is reprehensible is the way it defers to the market's requirements. They have to be radical changes in the policies, missions, and the very structure of the central bank. The Fed knows perfectly well that the wealth of the directors and the shareholders of the big private banks has increased, while day after day they implement and expand unacceptable procedures which will soon lead to another brutal crisis. The Fed also knows that the U.S. economy is in a bad way, despite Trump's congratulatory discourse and despite a historically low unemployment rate. The low unemployment rate is deceptive and induces a false sense of security, as employers, supported by successive governments, have forced workers to accept ever more precarious contracts and even lower wages. Not only that, but millions of unemployed have given up trying to get unemployment benefits and thus disappeared from unemployment figures. The Fed knows only too well that the allegedly healthy U.S. economy is bolstered up by a mountain of private and public borrowing, mainly used for speculation, which sooner or later will lead to a major new crisis. Add this to that of the growth of production in the United States industrial sector has fallen sharply in 2019 and could stagnate or even shrink in 2020. So see, this has been going on since 2008, after we bailed all these jokers out. Exports of manufactured goods are falling. Of course, it's because China makes everything. The Fed knows that if it were to raise interest rates and to cease constantly injecting liquidity, certain big companies, including banks, would fail. The Fed knows that if, in the interest of preventing a banking crisis, it were to demand that banks increase the amount of liquidity and liquidity that they must hold, there would be an outcry. They would make a huge fuss and ask Trump to intervene. So the Fed meekly, albeit reluctantly, complies with the demands of the markets. At present, the market's demands are quite clearly those of about 15 big private U.S. banks, four of which collectively hold 377 billion of cash reserves. They are J.P. Morgan, Chase Bank, Bank of America, Citigroup, and Wells Fargo, and by big investment funds such as BlackRock. We've heard about BlackRock lately as well. One thing is sure, the current situation of the private financial sector in the US and elsewhere in the world is definitely a source of deep concern. Otherwise, there's no reason for the Fed to have constantly being injected liquidity since September 17th, 2019. Still, if we want to fight them effectively, we have to understand the expectations and motivations of banks and their allies. I'm convinced that since mid September 2019, major banks have been trying to use the situation in the US to put pressure on the supervisory authority and on the Fed to lower the ratio of liquidity that is demanded to face most real systematic hazards. Indeed, since the 2008 crisis, the supervisory authorities have demanded that systemic banks keep more liquidity compared with what was the case before 2008 to be able to deal with an accident. Taking advantage of the support of the Trump administration and making the most of the laxity of Fed and the supervisory authorities, they are trying to get a lower liquidity ratio. They thus hope to be able to use their liquidity. Boy, that's just a really hard word for me to say. Liquidity. Quite illegally to buy and speculate on risky financial securities. As a result, the drying up of the interbank market is partly caused and or maintained by the strategy. As they pursue the objective, they are campaigning in the media to have the public believe that it is this liquidity requirement to deal with a possible accident of the kind that occurred in September 2008. That makes it hard to find liquidity on the interbank market. They are therefore lobbying the Fed and the supervisory authority to get the surplus liquidity requirement removed. So yeah, so basically, even they couldn't do it in 2008. Then they said, okay, yeah, well, we'll give you this much room to play, and they can't play by the rules. So you know what I mean? And most rich people will tell you, you make money on other people's money. You never touch your own money. So I imagine that's what the banks are doing. They managed to get the Trump administration to have the Volcker Rule abrogated from January 2020 onward. The Volcker Rule is a federal regulation that generally prohibits banks from conducting certain investment activities with their own accounts and limits their dealings with hedge funds and private equity funds, also called covered funds. Now you guys can understand. I'm wondering how much of the banks had money in that hedge fund that when everybody bought up GameStop, because they were betting that GameStop went down. And that was the big hubbub on that. I don't know how many people paid attention to it, but I'm pretty sure like Nancy and them guys were calling up going, yeah, don't sell any more of that stock, right? So this is the little game, but I, I'm not even on about the GameStop thing. This was just an article that I wanted to back up with y'all that the banks were having issues back in 2019. So the Volcker Rule was introduced in 2013 under Obama's presidency in the context of the Dodd-Frank Act that had been passed in the wake of 2007-2008 financial crisis. It prohibits banks from speculating with deposit money. A former director of the Federal Reserve, Paul Volcker, did not only warn against the versatility of the financial markets, he also considered that trading activities distracted banks from their core business, namely financing the economy. The banks want to go further and question the liquidity coverage ratio that was adopted in the US and the rest of the world after the 2008 crisis. The LCR is the requirement whereby banks must hold an amount of high quality liquid assets sufficient to fund cash overflows for 30 days. Liquidity ratios are similar to the LCR in that they measure a company's ability to meet its short term financial obligations. They also question the percentage of intraday liquidity, which is added to the liquidity coverage ratio. Early every morning around 7 a.m., banks go to the repo market to make up the liquidity that they need to meet their legal obligations. The big banks lobby claims that the amount required is too high and that has accounted for the crisis of September 17th, 2019. Guys, did anyone even know that we had a crisis? Was I the only one that was like, let's see. The banks are borrowing $600 billion from the Federal Reserve every week, and supposedly they were 2-week loans, right? So, but I knew that because I started buying silver back then. But let's go on with this. The Financial Times devoted an article to the topic under the suggestive title Fed Analyst Regulations Role in Sudden Rates Raise, published on October 2 in the paper edition, while it had been published online on the 1st under the title Fed Wrestles with Role of Regulation in Repo Squeeze. The article cautiously sanctions the U.S. banking lobby's argument. The European banking lobby expressed the same view concerning the implementation of a liquidity ratio on the old continent and in the UK. A forthcoming article will be devoted to the situation in Europe and more specifically in connection with the ECB's intervention under Mario, I guess that's Draghi, 2011 to 2019. Clearly, it cannot be the bank's obligation to hold enough liquidity to face a possible crisis that led to the shortage of liquidity on the U.S. repo market. The real cause was the bank's decision to use a maximum of their liquidities to speculate so as to maximize profits for their shareholders and executive offers. Well, here's a novel idea. How about you use your own profits and you stop jerking around with people's money or having to borrow money? Okay, so when I got some money in my savings account, if I myself want to invest money, I go to my savings account. It's not like I go and ask for a loan so I can play on the money market, because you guys know how it works with us. We lose, we still got to pay that loan back, right? So I don't think that they should be allowed to play with people's money. This overview of the bank situation would not be complete if we did not draw attention to the risks for society entailed by the financial markets and the U.S. repo market. We also have to be aware that merging operations have led to a far more concentrated U.S. banking sector, and that competition among banks has sharply decreased since a real oligopoly. Oh, this is cool. Oligopoly. Oh, okay. Oligopoly has emerged. A cartel of banks that exerts a constant pressure on the government for it to develop policies that favor capital. This cartel is responsible for decisions that run against the interest of the majority of people, enforcing abusive mortgage contracts, as was exposed by the subprime crisis and the many ensuing litigations. Abusive contracts for student loans. Student debt in the US runs to over 1,500 billion and affects 44 million people. Tampering with the interest rates, the LIBOR, speculating on basic commodities, laundering drug money, investing in activities that contribute to the climate emergency, etc. See a series of articles that were published, blah, blah, blah. Hold on, guys. Corpse was out?
Yeah, she was out.
Uh-oh. Sorry, I'm live. Come on, Corpse. What was you doing out there, my little love muffin? Sorry about that, guys. My cat got out of my room. I didn't even notice she was gone. So we also have to expose the amount of money paid to banks, executives, and to shareholders. We should again denounce the fact that in spite of several crimes and offenses perpetrated by bankers, none of them so far has been sentenced to jail, and no major bank has had its banking license withdrawn. Let us take the case of Wells Fargo. This bank, which ranks fourth in the U.S. in terms of stock market capitalization and control on the banking market, was allowed to continue operating even though a U.S. court had concluded that its executives had knowingly incited their employees to open 1,300,000 fictitious bank accounts in order to increase the bank's profits. Thanks to bank charges levied on each customer, the bank merely paid a fine. None of its executives was sentenced to jail. Part 2. The solutions to the crisis. Let us not wait for the next crisis before we take clearer positions on banks and initiate action. The factors that could trigger a new financial crisis on a world scale are present in the US as in other major economies. But it is no good waiting for it to burst before taking action. Beyond attempting to avoid the consequences of another financial crisis, we must put an end to the daily robbery of capitalist banks. We must also radically change the status and mission of the central bank. We need immediate measures. We have to give the central bank a new mission of granting zero-rated loans to governments, contrary to what is done by the Fed or the ECB because of EU treaties. A central bank should be able to finance projects initiated by state or all national and local public bodies, collectivities, hospitals, social housing bodies, etc., at a zero interest rate so as to carry out socially just policies as part of our struggle against the ecological crisis. We need a new banking regulation that will impose the following measures: significantly increase the bank's ratio of equity to their balance sheets, which ought to be above 20%. Implement all necessary measures to force banks to clean up their off-balance sheet commitments, including all speculative transactions and all other unsafe transactions that are not in the interest of the community. Prohibit credit relations between deposit banks and investment banks. Prohibit securitization. Each of the banking activities will thus bear the risk and generates through appropriate regulatory requirements. Prohibit high-frequency trading. Prohibit OTC financial markets. Prohibit any connection between banking institution and shadow banking, as well as tax and legal havens. Prohibit the socialization of losses. Put an end to the banking secrecy. Systematically prosecute managers responsible for financial offenses and crimes and withdraw banking licenses from institutions that do not respect prohibitions and are guilty of embezzlement. Establish real financial responsibility of the major shareholders, in particular in the case of bankruptcy. The aim is to restore the unlimited liability of major shareholders so that the cost of the hazardous activities can be recovered from their own assets. Increase taxation on banks, but that's not enough. Uh-oh. Yikes. Okay, well, you know what? That's the link is there. I mean, they got a problem, they got a solution. The main part of this article, guys, was pretty much to show you, hi, Reed, hi, Bubba, was to show you that we did have an issue. We had an issue back in 2019, and nobody knew about it. You know, because you know all these anchors on the mainstream. Hi, Jimmy. You know that they're all, they're all invested. It's all shh, shh, don't say anything to the little people, right? Because no, we know that you're flipping crooks. We know that you steal money. You know that you put the squeeze on us little people. Anybody ever bounce a check? What is it? 35 bucks? You ever be late with your credit card payment? 35 bucks. I actually have a credit card that they charge me $10 because they don't have an automated system to take my payment each and every month. You know, I want to get that thing paid off. I'm so close to, right. But in any event, I don't even know why these people are having any issues. I mean, what they take from the little guy should be plenty, right? And it's not that little people like me and you are declaring bankruptcy. It's the big people. You ever hear about Joe Biden's brother? His one brother, is it, what's his name? Paul? Not James, Frank. So Frank, back in the 70s, I think right about when Biden first became senator, his brother took a loan out for a disco. I don't know how much, maybe $1 million. I'm going to put it out there, maybe, right? So within 6 months, he declares bankruptcy. So this is how these big political shits literally get their money. They go to a bank, they say, yeah, I want $1 million. Yeah, you know who my brother is, right? Yeah. And then they probably have like this little big construction company and they write these big checks out and they say, I don't know, man, the work never got done. I bankrupt. And it's their company. It's called a corporate shell, right? So that's how they do that. And you guys know I was all over those foundations, all over the place. So in any event, that was a really long article. How about, let me see, what else do I have? I think this is a shorter one. I'll read one more and then I got like a little teeny little banking video, because we got to make sure we put the visual stuff in there, right? So let me see. Let me get rid of that. Oh, okay, that was the Federal Reserve one. Let me get rid of this. Let me get rid of this. Okay, so this isn't very long. Let's see what we've got going on here. Okay, so what's the name of this article, right? Okay, good, we got that. So where are the hundreds of billions in loans from the Fed actually going on Wall Street? So this was October 10th, 2019. It was only appropriate to start with all the stuff from the past so I can wrap all this in and tell, because literally, I think all this debt forgiveness is a bank bailout. So I gotta prove my theory, right? So anyway, this was October 19th, October 10th. My eyesight's really bad tonight. No one can say with any certainty where the hundreds of billions of dollars that the Federal Reserve has been pumping into Wall Street since September 17th are actually ending up. The Fed is not releasing the numbers of which of its primary dealers, security firms, are taking the lion's share of the loans, nor does anyone know. If those borrowers are making further loans with the money, which is a core purpose of the central bank's lender of last resort function, or simply plugging a hole in their own leaky boat, astonishingly, Congress has yet to call a hearing to ask these critical questions. Let's say, hypothetically, that there is a bank with a large interconnected footprint on it. Wall Street, that's in trouble. And on top of that, there's a big hedge fund taking on water and listing on its side. The New York Fed, one of the 12 regional banks in the Federal Reserve System, in that situation might be expected to call all of the big lenders on Wall Street to have a secret meeting in their offices and suggest, much like a consigliere makes a suggestion, that they bail out these entities for good of the markets and financial system. Could that really happen? Here's a paragraph from the Wall Street Journal report dated September 25th, 1998. Oh, sorry, I had to light my cigarette. Meeting Wednesday evening at the headquarters of New York Federal Reserve, 15 financial institutions agreed to chip in $3.5 billion to keep alive the long-term capital management LP hedge fund. So this was September 25th, 1998. The long-term capital hedge fund was a 5-year-old firm with two noble literates on board that fed exotic mathematical formulas into computers that then spit out the rationale for taking on insane levels of leveraged derivative bets. It all blew up spectacularly, of course. Alan Greenspan, the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board of Governors at the time, would later tell Congress that the decision to convene that meeting was done on the judgment of the officials at the Federal Reserve Bank in New York. In other words, the New York Fed typically believes it needs to outside approvals for its actions when it comes to Wall Street. Fast forward to another crisis in September 2008, this time with a big teetering investment bank. The Wall Street Journal reported on September 13, 2008. The Federal Reserve Bank in New York held an emergency meeting Friday night with top Wall Street executives to discuss the future of venerable firm Lehman Brothers Holdings, Inc., and the parlous state of U.S. financial markets. In the case of Lehman, a solution was not obtained, and the investment bank filed bankruptcy on September 15, 2008, bringing on the next leg of what would become the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. Last week, Reuters' David Henry reported that J.P. Morgan Chase may have contributed to the dangerous spike in overnight lending rates on September 17th by withdrawing liquidity from the system. Do you guys know he withdrew 57% of all his money? I cannot find the paperwork. Maybe it'll mention it here, but I had read that, and I think I read it on a show too. So I'm not sure if I was able to share the screen. But anyway, the loss of liquidity triggered the New York Fed's operation to pump billions of dollars of overnight and term loans into Wall Street each week since then, Henry wrote. Analysts and bank rivals said big changes JP Morgan made in its balance sheet played a role in the spike in the repo market, which is an important adjunct to the Fed fund market and used by the Fed to influence interest rates. Publicly filed data shows JP Morgan reduced the cash it had on deposit at the Federal Reserve, from which it might have lent by $158 billion in the year through June A 57% decline. See, there it is, guys. Check that out from memory. The move by JP Morgan Chase, whose chairman and CEO, Jamie Dimon, is the only person at the helm of a major Wall Street bank to have come through the 2008 financial crisis, suggests that the bank is getting closer to home with his money, as the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, Lloyd Blankfein, phased it phrased it during the last financial crisis. This would not be the first time that JP Morgan Chase put its own interest ahead of the not so subtle what the heck, I can't even read that, nudges of New York Fed. You know, this, I don't know why they don't have this written in really dark type. It's really light for me. According to the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission, FCJC, the body created by Congress to deliver the official report on the causes and events of the 2008 crisis era, JP Morgan Chase demanded large sums of cash collateral to protect itself from a potential Lehman Brothers collapse just days before Lehman's bankruptcy filing on September 15, 2008, the report explains. JP Morgan demanded that Lehman post another $5 billion in cash by the opening of business tomorrow in New York. If it didn't, JP Morgan would exercise our right to decline to extend credit to you. JP Morgan CEO, Diamond President Black, and CRO Zubro had first made the demand in a phone call earlier that evening to Lehman CEO. Boy, could you guys just imagine being a freaking fly on the wall? Oh my goodness. Lehman CEO Ian Lowett and Lehman Treasurer Paolo Tanusi told the JP Morgan executives on the call that Lehman could not meet the demand. Diamond said Lehman's difficulties in coming up with the money were not JP Morgan's problem. Tanusi told FCIC they just wanted the cash. We made the point that it's too much cash to mobilize. There was no give on that. Again, they said that's not our problem. We just want the cash. When Tanusi asked what would keep JP Morgan from asking for $10 billion tomorrow, Diamond replied, nothing, maybe we will. So that's just to kind of show you where the markets were. That link is also in the description, but that kind of shows mad love. Google, let there be light. I got something on my screen. My eyesight's real bad tonight, guys. It was doing good. You know, I made all that collided silver and everything. And because I still have issues from the mold, I started putting it like on my eyelashes. So like the next day, my seeing was awesome. So I didn't put anything on my eyes today. But anyway, so I did call into Marfoogle, and I was like, well, yeah, you know, this is kind of like what I'm thinking is happening, right? And you can't just go and say, yeah, I'm the only one in the world that's thinking about this. Well, I'm probably not the only one in the world, but as far as I can see, I'm the only one willing to put it on the internet. So let's just do a little kind of cool little video. I found this, and you know, it's always like, geez, I hope I don't get nailed for it. You know how that stuff goes, right, guys? But we're going to put that on, and then I'm going to go down while you guys are watching. I'm going to make myself a pot of coffee. All that reading, I'm thirsty, and I forgot to put the coffee on, but I was on time. So here we go. I do share the audio.
Two great mysteries dominate our lives, love and money. What is love is a question that has been endlessly explored in stories, songs, books, movies, and television. But the same cannot be said about the question, what is money? It's not surprising that monetary theory hasn't inspired any blockbuster movies, but it was not even mentioned at the schools most of us attended. For most of us, the question, where does money come from, brings to mind a picture of the mint, printing bills and stamping coins. Money, most of us believe, is created by the government. It's true, but only to a point. Those metal and paper symbols of value we usually think of as money are indeed produced by an agency of the federal government called the Mint. But the vast majority of money is not created by the Mint. It is created in huge amounts every day by private corporations known as banks. Most of us believe that banks lend out money that has been entrusted to them by depositors. Easy to picture, but not the truth. In fact, banks create the money they loan, not from the bank's own earnings, not from the money deposited, but directly from the borrower's promise to repay. The borrower's signature on the loan papers is an obligation to pay the bank the amount of the loan plus interest, or lose the house, the car, whatever asset was pledged as collateral. That's a big commitment from the borrower. What does the same signature require of the bank? The bank gets to conjure into existence the amount of the loan and just write it into the borrower's account. Sound far-fetched? Surely that can't be true. But it is. To demonstrate how this miracle of modern banking came about, consider this simple story, the goldsmith's tale. Once upon various times, pretty much anything was used as money. It just had to be portable, and enough people had to have faith that it could later be exchanged for things of real value, like food, clothing, and shelter. Shells, cocoa beans, pretty stones, even feathers have been used as money. Gold and silver were attractive, soft, and easy to work with, so some cultures became expert with these metals. Goldsmiths made trade much easier by casting coins, standardized units of these metals whose weight and purity was certified. Well, to protect his gold, the goldsmith needed a vault, and soon his fellow townsmen were knocking on his door, wanting to rent space to safeguard their own coins and valuables. Before long, the goldsmith was renting every shelf in the vault and earning a small income from his vault rental business. Years went by, and the goldsmith made an astute observation. Depositors rarely came in to remove their actual physical gold, and they never all came in at once. That was because the claim checks the goldsmith had written as receipts for the gold were being traded in the marketplace as if they were the gold itself. This paper money was far more convenient than heavy coins, and amounts could simply be written instead of laboriously counted one by one for each transaction. Meanwhile, the goldsmith had another business. He lent out his gold, charging interest. Well, as convenient claim check money came into acceptance, borrowers began asking for their loans in the form of these claim checks instead of the actual metal. As industry expanded, more and more people asked the goldsmith for loans. This gave the goldsmith an even better idea. He knew that very few of his depositors ever removed their actual gold, so the goldsmith figured he could easily get away with lending out claim checks against his depositors' gold, in addition to his own. As long as the loans were repaid, his depositors would be none the wiser and no worse off, and the goldsmith, now more banker than artisan, would make a far greater profit than he could by lending only his own gold. For years, the goldsmith secretly enjoyed a good income from the interest earned on everybody else's deposits. Now a prominent lender, he grew steadily richer than his fellow townsmen, and he flaunted it. Suspicions grew that he was spending his depositors' money. His depositors got together and threatened withdrawal of their gold if the goldsmith didn't come clean about his newfound wealth. Contrary to what one might expect, this did not turn out to be a disaster for the goldsmith. Despite the duplicity inherent in his scheme, his idea did work. The depositors had not lost anything. Their gold was all safe in the goldsmith's vault. Well, rather than taking back their gold, the depositors demanded that the goldsmith, now their banker, cut them in by paying them a share of the interest. And that was the beginning of banking. The banker paid a low interest rate on deposits of other people's money that he then loaned out at a higher interest. The difference covered the bank's cost of operation and its profit. The logic of this system was simple, and it seemed like a reasonable way to satisfy the demand for credit. However, this is not the way banking works today. Our goldsmith banker was not content with the income remaining after sharing the interest earnings with his depositors, and the demand for credit was growing fast as Europeans spread out across the world. But his loans were limited by the amount of gold his depositors had in his vault. That's when he got an even bolder idea. Since no one but himself knew what was actually in his vaults, he could lend out claim checks on gold that wasn't even there. As long as all the claim check holders didn't come to the vault at the same time and demand real gold, how would anyone find out? This new scheme worked very well, and the banker became enormously wealthy on the interest paid on gold that did not exist. The idea that the banker would just create money out of nothing was too outrageous to believe, so for a long time the thought did not occur to people. But the power to just invent money went to the banker's head, as you can well imagine. In time, the magnitude of the banker's loans and his ostentatious wealth did trigger suspicions once again. Some borrowers started to demand real gold instead of paper representations. Rumors spread. Suddenly, several wealthy depositors showed up to remove their gold. The game was up. A sea of claim check holders flooded the street outside the closed doors of the bank. Alas, the banker did not have enough gold and silver to redeem all the paper he had put into their hands. This is called a run on the bank, and it is what every banker dreads. This phenomenon of a run on the bank ruined individual banks and, not surprisingly, damaged public confidence in all bankers. It would have been straightforward to outlaw the practice of creating money from nothing. But the large volumes of credit the bankers were offering had become essential to the success of European commercial expansion. So instead, the practice was legalized and regulated. Bankers agreed to abide by limits on the amount of fictional loan money that could be lent out. The limit would still be a number much larger than the actual value of gold and silver in the vault. Quite often the ratio was 9 fictional dollars to 1 actual dollar in gold. These regulations were enforced by surprise inspections. It was also arranged that, in the event of a run, central banks would support local banks with emergency infusions of gold. Only if there were runs on a lot of banks simultaneously would the banker's credit bubble burst and the system come crashing down. Over the years, the fractional reserve system and its integrated network of banks backed by a central bank has become the dominant money system of the world. At the same time, the fraction of gold backing the debt money has steadily shrunk to nothing. The basic nature of money has changed. In the past, a paper dollar was actually a receipt that could be redeemed for a fixed weight of gold or silver. In the present, a paper or digital dollar can only be redeemed for another paper or digital dollar. In the past, privately created bank credit existed only in the form of private banknotes, which people had the choice to refuse, just as we have the choice to refuse someone's private check today. In the present, privately created bank credit is legally convertible to government-issued fiat currency, dollars, loonies, and pounds we habitually think of as money. Fiat currency is money created by government fiat or decree, and legal tender laws declare that citizens must accept this fiat money as payment for debt, or else the courts will not enforce the obligation. So now the question is, if governments and banks can both just create money, then how much money exists? In the past, the total amount of money in existence was limited to the actual physical quantities of whatever commodity was in use as money. For example, in order for new gold or silver money to be created, more gold or silver had to be found and dug out of the ground. In the present, money is literally created as debt. New money is created whenever anyone takes a loan from the bank. As a result, the total amount of money that can be created has only one real limit: the total level of debt. Governments place an additional statutory limit on the creation of new money by enforcing rules known as fractional reserve requirements. Essentially arbitrary, fractional reserve requirements vary from country to country and from time to time. In the past, it was common to require banks to have at least $1 worth of real gold in the vault to back $10 worth of debt money created. Today, reserve requirement ratios no longer apply to the ratio of new money to gold on deposit, but merely to the ratio of new debt money to existing debt money on deposit in the bank. Today, a bank's reserves consist of two things: the amount of government-issued cash or equivalent that the bank has deposited with the central bank, plus the amount of already existing debt money the bank has on deposit. To illustrate this in a simple way, let's imagine that a new bank has just started up and has no depositors yet. However, the bank's investors have made a reserve deposit of $1,111.12 of existing cash money at the central bank. The required reserve ratio is 9-to-1. Step 1. The door is open and the new bank welcomes its first loan customer. He needs $10,000 to buy a car. At the 9-to-1 reserve ratio, the new bank's reserve at the central bank, also known as high-powered money, allows it to legally conjure into existence 9 times that amount, or $10,000, on the basis of the borrower's pledge of debt. This $10,000 is not taken from anywhere. It's brand new money simply typed into the borrower's account as bank credit. The borrower then writes a check on that bank credit to buy the used car. Step 2. The seller then deposits this newly created $10,000 at her bank. Unlike the high-powered government money deposited at the central bank, this newly created credit money cannot be multiplied by the reserve ratio. Instead, it's divided by the reserve ratio. At a ratio of 9-to-1, a new loan of $9,000 can be created on the basis of the $10,000 deposit. Step 3. If that $9,000 is then deposited by a third party at the same bank that created it or at a different one, it becomes the legal basis for a third issue of bank credit, this time for the amount of $8,100. Like one of those Russian dolls where each layer contains a slightly smaller doll inside, each new deposit contains the potential for a slightly smaller loan in an infinitely decreasing series. Now, if the loan money created is not deposited at the bank, the process stops. That's the unpredictable part of the money creation mechanism. But more likely, at every step, the new money will be deposited at a bank, and the reserve ratio process can repeat itself over and over until almost $100,000 of brand new money has been created within the banking system. All of this new money has been created entirely from debt, and the whole process has been legally authorized by the initial reserve deposit of just $1,111.12, which is still sitting untouched at the central bank. What's more, under this ingenious system, the books of each bank in the chain must show that the bank has 10% more on deposit than it has out on loan. This gives banks a very real incentive to seek deposits in order to be able to make loans, supporting the general but misleading impression that loans come out of deposits. Now, unless all the successive loans are deposited at the same bank, It cannot be said that any one bank got to multiply its initial high-powered money reserve almost 90 times by issuing bank credit out of nothing. However, the banking system is a closed loop. Bank credit created at one bank becomes a deposit in another, and vice versa. In a theoretical world of perfectly equal exchanges, the ultimate effect would be exactly the same as if the whole process took place within one bank. That is, the bank's initial central bank reserve of a little over $1,100 allows it to ultimately collect interest on up to $100,000 the bank never had. If that sounds ridiculous, try this. In recent decades, as a result of steady lobbying by the banks, the requirements to make a reserve deposit at the nation's central bank have all but disappeared in some countries, and actual reserve ratios can be much higher than 9-to-1. For some types of accounts, 20-to-1 and 30-to-1 ratios are common. And even more recently, by using loan fees to raise the required reserve from the borrower, banks have now found a way to circumvent reserve requirement limitations entirely. So, while the rules are complex, the common sense reality is actually quite simple. Banks can create as much money as we can borrow. Despite the endlessly presented mint footage, government-created money typically accounts for less than 5% of the money in circulation. More than 95% of all money in existence today was created by someone signing a pledge of indebtedness to a bank. What's more, this bank credit money is being created and destroyed in huge amounts every day as new loans are made and old ones repaid. Banks can only practice this money system with the active cooperation of government. First, governments pass legal tender laws to make us use the national fiat currency. Secondly, governments allow private bank credit to be paid out in this government currency. Thirdly, government courts enforce debts. And lastly, governments pass regulations to protect the money system's functionality and credibility with the public, while doing nothing to inform the public about where money really comes from. The simple truth is that when we sign on the dotted line for a so-called loan or mortgage, our signed pledge of payment, backed by the assets we pledge to forfeit should we fail to pay, is the only thing of real value involved in the transaction. To anyone who believes we will honor our pledge, that loan agreement or mortgage is now a portable, exchangeable, and saleable piece of paper. It's an IOU. It represents value and is therefore a form of money. This money the borrower exchanges for the bank's so-called loan. Now, a loan in the real world means that the lender must have something to lend. If you need a hammer, my loaning you a promise to provide a hammer I don't have won't be of much help. But in the artificial world of money, a bank's promise to pay money it doesn't have is allowed to be passed off as money, and we accept it as such. Once the borrower signs the pledge of debt, the bank then balances the transaction by creating, with a few keystrokes on a computer, a matching debt of the bank to the borrower. From the borrower's point of view, this becomes loan money in his or her account, and because the government allows this debt of the bank to the borrower to be converted to government fiat currency, everyone has to accept it as money. Again, the basic truth is very simple. Without the document the borrower signed, the banker would have nothing to lend. Have you ever wondered how everyone, governments, corporations, small businesses, families, can all be in debt at the same time and for such astronomical amounts? Have you ever questioned how there can be that much money out there to lend? Now you know. There isn't. Banks do not lend money. They simply create it from debt. And as debt is potentially unlimited, so is the supply of money. And as it turns out, the opposite situation is also true. Isn't it astounding that despite the incredible wealth of resources, innovation, and productivity that surrounds us, almost all of us, from governments to companies to individuals, are heavily in debt to bankers? If only people would stop and think, how can that be? How can it be that the people who actually produce all the real wealth in the world are in debt to those who merely lend out the money that represents the wealth? Even more amazing is that once we realize that money really is debt, we realize that if there was no debt, there'd be no money. If this is news to you, you are not alone. Most people imagine that if all debts were paid off, the state of the economy would improve. It's certainly true on an individual level. Just as we have more money to spend when our loan payments are finished, we think that if everyone were out of debt, there would be more money to spend in general. But the truth is the exact opposite. There would be no money at all. There it is. We are totally dependent on continually renewed bank credit for there to be any money in existence. No loans, no money, which is what happened during the Great Depression. The money supply shrank drastically as the supply of loans dried up. And that's not all. Banks create only the amount of the principal. They don't create the money to pay the interest. Where is that supposed to come from? The only place borrowers can go to obtain the money to pay interest is the general economy's overall money supply. But almost all that overall money supply has been created exactly the same way, as bank credit that has to be paid back with more than was created. So everywhere there are other borrowers in the same situation, frantically trying to obtain the money they need to pay back both principal and interest from a total money pool which contains only principal. It is clearly impossible for everyone to pay back the principal plus interest because the interest money doesn't exist. This can even be expressed by a simple mathematical formula. The big problem here is that for long-term loans, such as mortgages and government debt, the total interest far exceeds the principal. So unless a lot of extra money is created to pay the interest, it means a very high proportion of foreclosures and a non-functioning economy. To maintain a functional society, the rate of foreclosure needs to be low. And so, to accomplish this, more and more new debt money has to be created to satisfy today's demands for money to service the previous debt. But of course, this just makes the total debt bigger, and that means more interest must ultimately be paid, resulting in an ever-escalating and inescapable spiral of mounting indebtedness. It is only the time lag between money's creation as new loans and its repayment that keeps the overall shortage of money from catching up and bankrupting the entire system. However, as the bank's insatiable credit monster gets bigger and bigger, the need to create more and more debt money to feed it becomes increasingly urgent. Why are interest rates so low? Why do we get unsolicited credit cards in the mail? Why is the US government spending faster than ever? Could it be to stave off collapse of the entire monetary system? A rational person has to ask, can this really go on forever? Isn't a collapse inevitable? Money facilitates production and trade. As the money supply increases, money just becomes increasingly worthless unless the volume of production and trade in the real world grows by the same amount. Add to this the realization that when we hear that the economy is growing at 3% per year, it sounds like a constant rate, but it's not. This year's 3% represents more real goods and services than last year's 3% because it's 3% of the new total. Instead of a straight line, as is naturally visualized from the words, it is really an exponential curve getting steeper and steeper. The problem, of course, is that perpetual growth of the real economy requires perpetually escalating use of real-world resources and energy. More and more stuff has to go from natural resource to garbage every year, forever, just to keep this system from collapsing. What can we do about this downright scary situation? For one thing, we need a very different concept of money. It's time more people ask themselves and their governments 4 simple questions. Around the world, governments borrow money at interest from private banks. Government debt is a major component of total debt, and servicing that debt takes a big chunk of our taxes. Now, we know that banks simply create the money they lend, and that governments have given them permission to do this. So the first question is, why do governments choose to borrow money from private banks at interest when government could create all the interest-free money it needs itself? And the second big question is, why create money as debt at all? Why not create money that circulates permanently and doesn't have to be perpetually reborrowed at interest in order to exist? The third question, how can a money system that can only function with perpetually accelerating growth be used to build a sustainable economy? Isn't it logical that perpetually accelerating growth and sustainability are incompatible? And finally, what is it about our current system that makes it totally dependent on perpetual growth? What needs to be changed to allow the creation of a sustainable economy? At one time, charging any interest on a loan was called usury and was subject to severe penalties, including death. Every major religion forbade usury. Most of the arguments made against the practice were moral. It was held that money's only legitimate purpose was to facilitate the exchange of real goods and services. Any form of making money from simply having money was regarded as the act of a parasite or of a thief. However, as the credit needs of commerce increased, the moral arguments eventually gave way to the argument that lending involves risk and loss of opportunity to the lender, and therefore attempting to make a profit from lending is justified. Today, these notions seem quaint. Today, the idea of making money from money is held as an ideal to strive for. Why work when you can get your money to work for you? However, in trying to envision a sustainable future, it's very clear that the charging of interest is both a moral and a practical problem. Imagine a society and economy that can endure for centuries because, instead of plundering its capital stores of energy, it restricts itself to present-day income. No more wood is harvested than grows in the same period. All energy is renewable, solar, gravitational, geothermal, magnetic, and whatever else we discover. This society lives within the limits of its non-renewable resources by reusing and recycling everything, and the population just replaces itself. Such a society could never function using a money system utterly dependent on perpetually accelerating growth. A stable economy would need a money supply at least capable of remaining stable without collapsing. Let's say the total volume of this stable money supply is represented by this big circle. Let's also imagine that moneylenders must actually have existing money to lend. If some people within this money supply begin systematically lending money at interest, their share of the money supply will grow. If they continually reloan at interest all the money that gets paid back, what's the inevitable result? Whether it's gold, fiat, or debt money doesn't matter. The money lenders will end up with all the money. And after the foreclosures and bankruptcies are all filed, they'll get all the real property too. Only if the proceeds of lending at interest were evenly distributed among the population would this central problem be solved. Heavy taxation of bank profits might accomplish this goal, but then why would banks want to be in business? If we were ever able to free ourselves of the current situation, we could imagine banking run as a non-profit service to society, dispersing its interest earnings as a universal citizen dividend, or lending without charging interest at all. If it is the fundamental nature of the system that causes the problems, tinkering with the system cannot ever solve those problems. The system itself must be replaced. Many monetary critics call for a return to gold-based money, claiming that gold has a long history of reliability. They ignore the many scams that can be played with gold, shaving coins, debasing the metal, cornering the market, all of which were abundantly practiced in ancient Rome and contributed to its fall. Some advocate silver, it being more abundant than gold and therefore more difficult to corner. Many question the need to bring back precious metals at all. No one wants to go back to carrying heavy sacks of coins to go shopping. It's a certainty that paper, digital, plastic, or more likely biometric ID money would be the real medium of trade, with the same potential for creating unlimited debt money we have now. Beyond that, if gold again became the sole legal basis of money, those who have no gold would suddenly have no money. Other monetary reform advocates have concluded that greed and dishonesty are the main problems, and that there may be better ways to create an honest and equitable money system than returning to silver or gold. Inventive minds have proposed a variety of alternate ways to create money. Many private barter systems create money as debt, much as banks do, but it is done openly and without charging interest. An example is a barter system in which debt is expressed as pledges of hours of work, all work being valued equally at a dollar figure that then allows hours to be equated with the dollar price of goods. This kind of money system can be set up by anyone who can devise a way to do the accounting and find willing and trustworthy participants. Setting up a local barter money system, even if it were little used now, would be prudent emergency planning for any community. Monetary reform, like electoral reform, is a big topic, and one that requires a willingness to change and to think outside the box. Monetary reform, again, like electoral reform, will not come easily, because the enormously powerful interests that benefit from the existing system will do their utmost to maintain their advantage. Now that we've seen that money is just an idea, and that in reality money can be whatever we make it, here's one very simple alternative monetary concept to consider. This model is based on systems that have worked in the past, in England and America, systems that were undermined and destroyed by the goldsmith bankers and their fractional reserve system. To create an economy based on permanent interest-free money, money could simply be created and spent into the economy by the government, preferably on long-lasting infrastructure that facilitates the economy, such as roads, railroads, bridges, harbors, and public markets. This money would not be created as debt, it would be created as value, that value being in the form of whatever it was spent on. If this new money facilitated a proportional increase in trade requiring its use, it would cause no inflation whatsoever. If government spending did cause inflation, there would be two courses of action available. Inflation is equivalent in effect to a flat tax on money. Whether the money goes down in value 20% or the government takes 20% of our money away from us, the effect on our buying power is the same. Viewed this way, inflation in place of taxation might be politically acceptable if well spent and kept within limits. Or government could choose to counter inflation by collecting tax monies that it then takes out of use, thus reducing the money supply and restoring its value. To control deflation, which is the phenomenon of falling wages and prices, the government would simply spend more money into existence. With no competing private debt money creation, governments would have more effective control of their nation's money supply. The public would know whom to blame if things went wrong. Governments would rise and fall on their ability to preserve the value of money. Government would operate primarily on taxes, as it does now, but tax money would go much, much further, as none of it would be required to pay interest to private bankers. There could be no national debt if the federal government simply created the money it needed. Our perpetual collective servitude to the banks through interest payments on government debt would be impossible. What we have been taught to believe is democracy and freedom has become in reality an ingenious and invisible form of economic dictatorship. As long as our entire society remains utterly dependent on bank credit for its supply of money, bankers will be in the position to make the decisions on who gets the money they need and who doesn't. Few people are aware today that the history of the United States since the Revolution in 1776 has been, in large part, the story of an epic struggle to get free and stay free of control by the European international banks. This struggle was finally lost in 1913, when President Woodrow Wilson signed into effect the Federal Reserve Act, putting the international banking cartel in charge of creating America's money. power of this system is deeply ingrained. So is the educational and media silence on the subject. Years ago, a Canadian Deputy Prime Minister surveyed scores of non-economists, both highly educated professionals and common-sense people on the street, and found that not one of them had an accurate understanding of how money is created. In fact, it's probably safe to say that most people, including the frontline employees of banks, have never given the matter a moment's thought. Have you? The modern money-as-debt system was born a little over 300 years ago, when the first Bank of England was set up with a royal charter for fractional lending of gold receipts at a modest ratio of 2 to 1. That modest ratio was just the proverbial foot in the door. The system is now worldwide, creates virtually unlimited amounts of money out of thin air, and has almost everyone on the planet chained to a perpetually growing debt that can never be paid off. Could it have all happened by accident? Or is it a conspiracy? Obviously, something very big is at stake here.
So, okay, that was a little visual aid because, I do like to try to add something like that in. Really sucks when I got to do a show and do all the reading and so it kind of gives me a break. Let me see. Okay, so the next, I'm going to take you to another article, and it's J.P. Morgan to pay 920 million for manipulating bond metal markets. Okay, and this article from CBS News. Um, I don't think it's very long. Um, let me see. Doot, 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 doot. So this, the reason I stuck this in here was simply because I want you to see what happens when these big boys screw up, right? So, like you would think people be tossed in jail or something. Nope. Watch this. So, this is an article from CBS, and this is September 29th, 2020. So, this is almost a year after they had that issue. So, JP Morgan to pay 920 million for manipulating bond and metals market. JP Morgan Chase admitted Tuesday to manipulating the markets for precious metals and US Treasuries, agreeing to pay 920 million in fines and penalties for the illegal behavior. Excuse me 1 second. Gidget needs to come in. Gidget. Come on, you guys. Come on. All right. Is everybody in? Okay. Let me have a kitty count. Monks, corporate, Gidget. Maura, you're in your house. Okay, they're all in. U.S. financial regulators and the Department of Justice said traders at J.P. Morgan used a tactic known as spoofing over an 8-year period. Spoofing is when traders send trading signals into a market with no intention of buying or selling at those prices in order to move a market in one direction or another. In the case of the U.S. Treasury market, the Securities and Exchange Commission said JP Morgan traders submitted both trades they intended to act upon as well as spoof trades. The goal was to use the spoof to nudge the market in a certain direction and then activate the intended trade to profit from the move. JP Morgan Securities undermined the integrity of our markets with the scheme, said Stephanie Avakian, director of the SEC's Division of Enforcement, in a prepared statement. Their manipulative trading of the Treasury cash securities created a false appearance of activity in the market and induced another market participants to trade at more favorable prices than JP Morgan Securities would have otherwise been able to obtain. I wonder how much Nancy and the gang made off of this deal. JP Morgan agreed to settle with U.S. authorities and will enter into what's known as a deferred prosecution agreement for 3 years. It will also pay fines and penalties to the SEC as well as the Commodities Future Trading Commission. So that was their spank. Oh, that didn't show. Dang it all. Sorry. So they get a smack on the wrist and a fine. So imagine if you and I went down to our basement and printed up some money, we would be working on the railroad, on the chain gang, us little people. But yeah, look, you're talking about somebody with millions and billions and maybe trillions of dollars. Like, what's 920 million? Why didn't they just make them even billion? They'll nail you on that credit card. So, okay, the next thing I have for you guys, let me, okay, gotta make sure that's up, is another article. So now I'm bringing you more to the future, right? So I had to show you the past in order to get where we are. I mean, there's one thing about having a theory And I could tell you guys, well, I read this, I read this 6 months ago. But there's another thing about sharing and showing you guys and then like walking you through why I believe what I believe. So, but here was some a news article I thought that could be of interest tonight. Um, Democrats urge Biden to include reoccurring stimulus checks in the Build Back Better plan. Right? So I talked about this as well. So we're not going to play that video. 10 Senate Democrats have asked President Joe Biden to support a plan to send reoccurring stimulus checks and automatically extended unemployment benefits to low-income Americans as part of the administration's upcoming COVID-19 relief package. The senators asked Biden via a letter sent Tuesday to include the additional financial assistance as part of his Build Back Better plan. Now, guys, I've heard that the next stimulus is going to cost between $2 and $3 trillion. And I read another article today that said it's going to cost $7.3 trillion. And there's no way. I mean, come on. Come on, man. You mean to tell me within 6 months that this man's in office, he's going to throw out 10 trillion? It'd be nice if it came to us, the people. But, instead it went to cities that burnt down, people that mismanage money. And would we get like 6% of just this bill, right? And honestly, I think there should be a law that says no bill shall become law if it's more than 10 pages long. Come on, 5,000. The other one, the care package was over 5,500 pages. My Bible was what? 1,855 pages. Come on. Anyway, the Build Back Better plan is different from the current stimulus packet that was passed by the House on Saturday and will be taken up by the Senate this week. The current stimulus plan, which has a $1.9 trillion price tag, already includes an extension of federal unemployment benefits through the end of August and a one-time $1,400 direct payment to millions of Americans. This crisis is far from over, and families deserve certainty that they can put food on the table and keep a roof over their heads. The senators wrote in a letter, families should not be at the mercy of constantly shifting legislative timelines and add HOC solutions. The letter did not say how big or how frequent the check should be. The 10 senators who signed the letter sent to Biden on Tuesday are Senators Elizabeth Warren, Alex Padilla, Bernie Sanders, Michael Bennet, Cory Booker, Ed Markey, Kirsten Gillibrand, Sherrod Brown, and Tammy Baldwin, all Democrats. The letter is set to be distributed to the rest of the Democratic caucus, the Washington Post reported, adding that it likely represents the next Democratic fight over how much aid should be sent directly to Americans. A bill that authorizes more spending is likely to face strong pushback from Republicans. Last week, for the House passage of the current stimulus bill, Arizona Republican Rep. Paul Gosar submitted an amendment to a bill that would have sent $10,000 stimulus checks to eligible Americans. The checks would have been funded by money earmarked for portions of the bill Gosar said were not aimed at helping those in need during the pandemic, according to a story from Fox News. I offered an amendment to prioritize 10,000 stimulus checks to Americans most affected by COVID-19 and lockdowns, Gosar said in a statement to Fox News Saturday. Instead, Democrats chose foreign aid, big tech transit, and Pelosi's political priorities over direct relief to American citizens. Gosar said he wanted to remove 10 of the agenda items in the $1.9 trillion bill, saying the money that would be used to fund those programs should be divided among Americans who need it. People need help with car payments, mortgage and rent, and everyday necessities, Gassar said. The government broke it. Now government must fix it. The people, not corporations or billionaires, need the money to survive, he added, saying a 10,000 stimulus check should be considered a down payment. The amendment to the bill failed. So, there we got that one. Now, because I started this out about the debt forgiveness for student loans, naturally, I have an article for that as well. So, yeah, we'll get right on to that too. So, the COVID-19 relief package includes a hidden benefit for student loan borrowers that could save thousands in tax payments on loans that have been forgiven. So, I didn't even think it would be in this packet, right? But apparently it's in there. The 1.9 trillion stimulus packet now includes the Student Loan Tax Relief Act. The bill would end the current policy that taxes certain forms of student loan forgiveness. About 2,200 in taxes would be saved for every 10,000 of forgiven student loan debt. The Student Loan Tax Relief Act, introduced on March 1st by Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bob Menendez, is a part of the 1.9 trillion stimulus packet. The legislation would end the current policy that taxes student loans forgiven by the government. For example, For example, if the government forgave $10,000 for a borrower who earns $50,000, that person would be spared about $2,200 in taxes levied against that payment. According to the senators, under the current policy, that $10,000 is considered taxable income. If the bill passes, it could be the most sustainable step taken to relieve student debt in the U.S., which totals more than $1.6 trillion. Oh, man, come on, stop. The new legislation would affect loans modified or discharged between December 31st, 2020 and January 1st, 2025, and include both private and institutional loans, according to a press release from Menendez. The senator said the Student Loan Forgiveness Act paves the way for President Biden to cancel at least $50,000 in federal student loan debt. Biden recently rejected committing to forgive $50,000 in the student loan debt for borrowers, but said he would support forgiving up to $10,000 of borrowers' student loan debt. So they probably got together with like JP Morgan and them and said, "Gee, man, how much do you need? Yeah, we don't want to do too much, but we just want to bail you guys out, right?" Ashley Harrington, the federal advocacy director and senior counsel at the Center for Responsible Lending, said in a press release that the bill especially benefits low-income borrowers and borrowers of color who are disproportionately burdened by student debt and the negative impacts of the current health and economic crisis. Harrington also called on Biden to turn toward providing across-the-board student debt cancellation of $50,000 per borrower. Yup, banks probably said, "Joe, man, 10K is not going to cut it. We need 50K. And we got 50K. The Senate approved the $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package last weekend, and it's now on its way to the House for a vote. It includes a one-time $1,400 stimulus payment for taxpayers who qualify, $300 weekly unemployment assistance through early September, aid to fund vaccine distribution and testing, and aid to local governments to help combat the corona. The largest provision in the bill would affect businesses, schools, and personal finance. Cut from the package was a proposal to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Yeah, I want to know what idiot pulled that out from their bum, right? Gee, people lost their businesses. If they want to start one, they got to pay $15 an hour. So you're going to pay $10 for a taco at Taco Bell. You're only going to have 2 workers. So, yeah. Hey, way to slap it up, Dems. Democrats are hoping to finalize the bill and have it sent to Biden, sign it into law by March 14th. Yeah. So, and that was that. So, in a nutshell, guys, right? I think all this stuff is a bank bailout. We see where they were in trouble. I brought those articles up. Many people didn't even know that there was an issue um, with anything with the banks in September of 2019. And I will say it again. I said this about 6 months ago that the pandemic was the cover. Can you just imagine? Just imagine if after 2008 that they said, "Oh yeah, we got to bail the banks out again." I think that the whole human race worldwide would have went to every bank and ripped a bank brick by brick. But however, if there was this catastrophe and this virus went all over the world and everybody had to stay home and all the economies crashed, people seem, I think that they would be more forgiving, saying, well, you know, it was the virus that did it, right? It was the virus. It was no one's fault. This country can say, oh, you let it go. No, you let it go. It doesn't really matter. It's here, right? So, we all dug down those rabbit holes to find out where this little thing came from. But I called in a Marfoogle, and I want to give another shout out to Marfoogle. Thank you for having me on your show, and I appreciated it. And thank you, all the Foo Fam, for coming over and giving me the love mob. So, but there you guys have it in a nutshell. You can't do a whole lot in a 10-minute conversation. And of course, I didn't have the links to the articles available because really, I'm finding stuff that I've had bookmarked that doesn't even exist anymore. It's just gone, taken from the internet. But I'm getting kind of slick. I know how to actually download it. So I'm getting a little better from a little tech tardness. So
I don't wanna set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. In my heart I have but one desire, and that one is you. No other will do. I've lost an ambition for worldly acclaim. I just wanna be the one you love, and with your admission that you feel the same, I have reached the goal I'm dreaming of. Believe me, I don't wanna set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart. I don't want to set the world on fire, honey. I love you too much. I just want to start a great big flame down in your heart. Way down inside of me, darling. and that one desire is you. And I know nobody else ain't got it. I've lost an ambition for worldly acclaim. I just wanna be the one you love. And with your admission that you feel the same, I have reached the goal I'm dreaming of. Believe me, I don't wanna set the world on fire. I just want to start a flame in your heart.
Good night, everybody. God bless.